The United States Army Intelligence Support Activity, frequently shortened to Intelligence Support Activity or Mission Support Activity, and nicknamed The Activity, the Army of Northern Virginia, or Office of Military Support, is a United States Army Special Operations Unit originally subordinated to the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, but now is part of Joint Special Operations. It is tasked to collect actionable intelligence in advance of missions by other U.S. Special Operations Forces. Paul Vallely is a retired U.S. Army Major General and Senior Military Analyst for Fox News. He served in the Vietnam War and retired in 1993 as Deputy Commanding General. In 2004, together with retired Air Force Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney, Valley co-authored the book Endgame, The Blueprint for Victory in the War on Terror. Valley currently serves as the Military Committee Chairman for the Center for Security Policy and has lent his support to the organization Veteran Defenders of America. In 2013, he called for a march on Washington by patriots to force President Obama to resign. And here is Paul Vallely confirming Q-Anon.
Do you know who the individual calling himself or themselves, if it's an organizational effort, Q? What do you know about that? Was that part of the PSYOP? What are you at liberty to say? Or is it a bunch of bunk?
Well, let me just tell you the QAnon's tied to information. And it comes out of a group called the Army of Northern Virginia. Okay?
Yep.
Now, this is a group of military intelligence specialists of over 800 people that advise the president.
And so
the president doesn't have a lot of confidence in the CIA or even the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, as much anymore. So he relies on these real operators. Most of them are special operations type of people.
Yeah.
And so this is where Q picks up and gets some of their information, as I understand it.
All right, so now we've had it announced that 8chan was dropped. They've come back now. 8chan. Chan was child in Japanese. They've now announced that they're going to relaunch as 8kun, which is young adult in Japanese. So there's a ripening of age in the PSYOP. It's also been announced that 8kun is going to be backed up by military satellites so that if there's an internet blackout, that message cannot be stopped. What can you say anything about that, General?
Well, I know what they're looking at now, these alternate technologies of actually creating a separate internet. Okay?
Yep.
And this internet can't be compromised. It's so high-tech. Of course, that's up to conjecture. But there's some technologies in clouding and all of this stuff that they're working on, and the Chinese have been working on it as well. But they're really looking alternatives to communicate worldwide with an alternative, or I'd say an alternative to our internet as we know it today. That's all I can tell you about that.
Fair enough, General. You've told me a lot in just what you said there. I appreciate that. So also, I had another listener point out to me that there are some major anti-Trump, Antifa-type protests scheduled for the 19th, the day after the Inspector General report is set to launch. Is there a leak inside the Inspector General's office, and is that how they knew to plan it for the day after? What are your thoughts on that, General?
Well, I don't know about that. All I know is that this Antifa is very well funded.
Let's get into that.
The mayor of the cities have to really stand up. Many of them very liberal socialist Democrats, as we see in Portland, Oregon, for example, that we saw in Minneapolis. These mayors actually should be arrested by the police for their activities, which are counter to a good, productive society in their cities. And they're encouraging by allowing this to happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if they've heard about the 18th some way and they're planning any kind of protest in the various cities where they're located.
I got to ask you, General, this is another question that I talked about with another fellow that I was talking with just the other day. Do you personally know or have you had interactions with General Michael Flynn?
Yes.
You guys know each other pretty well?
Fairly well.
And have you
Matter
spoken?
of fact, before I was in Moscow a couple months before he went over, so I talked to him before he left. And then when he left to go over there and go to the 10th banquet of Russian television, and he sat with Putin. I had been in Moscow 2 months earlier than that, setting up the meeting between Trump and Putin, which I did while I was there. And that was at the G20 conference in 2017. So, yes, and Michael Flynn must be vindicated. He was one of the individuals that the deep state attacked first, as you remember. And what they've done to that gentleman, who's a great patriot and a soldier, have just harmed him and his family so much. So I think all of that's going to be turned around for General Flynn. We'll see what happens shortly.
I myself predict that when everything comes out in the wash, General Flynn is going to be a rich man from all the lawsuits he's going to launch.
Well, they need to put some money back in his coffers because he sure deserves it. But, the money he's had to spend just on fees, attorney fees, and that's been but he has a great attorney right now. So
absolutely. Yeah, I know Dr. Jerome Corsi as well, and they really railroaded him. I mean, he was looking at, he would have basically died in jail unless he lied about the president was the deal, basically. And we all know that even if he did, they still would have rolled on him.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, Jerry. I've done a lot of articles with him. Yep. Well, these are all the travesties that the deep state has created in the United States. I'm sure you don't have anything to that degree in Canada, do you?
No, not even close. It's nothing but sunshine and lollipops up here. There's no shooting, no crime, health care is free, and all that the lies that they tell Americans about Canada. Interestingly enough, I did have a question about Canada for you.
Okay.
A year or two ago, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, Prime Minister Gay Sox, met with former Secretary of State John Kerry on a private island with the Aga Khan, who is the international leader of the Hashashin, or the International Order of Assassins, going back hundreds of years. Now, Trump had just been elected. He had not been inaugurated. And they said that, and interestingly enough, the Prime Minister ditched his personal security detail in order to go to this meeting. Now, is there any that you're aware of? Is there any kind of transmissions that were intercepted from that meeting? A lot of Canadians are really upset about it, and a lot of people are speculating that they were openly speaking about an assassination plot on the president and how to deal with it afterward. Are you at liberty to speak on that subject, General?
Mike, I wish I could, but I really don't know anything much about other than what you've said. I was not drawn into that. Don't have any background information to help you on that one.
That's good. And like I said before, if you don't know, that's the best answer. So, General, I've been kind of just going on and on here. I want to give you the floor for the rest of this segment, if you want. What is the most pressing thing to get out to the world and to America as to what is going to happen next? Are they anticipating any kind of rioting or civil unrest or anything that we need to know? I'm going to give you the floor. What's the biggest thing on your mind right now, General, with where we're at and what's about to come down the pike?
Well, I'm giving a talk Thursday morning down here in Montana on national security threats to the United States, and I've listed about 4 or 5 as priority. One of the top priority threats to America is the movement to a socialist state here in America.
Yeah.
That is a very big threat now, and a lot of our millennials and students think it's just great that we have a socialist state and we have all these giveaway programs. To me, that's the biggest threat to America right now. The second biggest threat would be the cartels and illegal border crossers, which we really have a handle on finally, and shore up our borders so that people are coming into this country for whatever reason, whether they're visitors or tourists, or they're coming here on work visas, that we legitimize those people that are coming across legitimately and really enforce our laws. The third would be China and their influence around the world now. And, of course, Trump is handling that very keenly now with the Chinese on these new trade deals that hopefully will take effect. But the Chinese expansion of their military, their continued support of North Korea, definitely a threat. I think the fourth threat is the undermining of Europe, which then affects the United States, particularly with the European Union and their inability to even have their countries have strong leaders over there. And they're basically, many of them, failing states from an economic standpoint. So I think that's a big threat, not only to Europe, but the United States and other people that deal with Europe. I think the fifth biggest threat is the education of our young people, that they're not getting a very basic education in history, in the sciences, where they can get jobs. They're influenced by a tremendous 18 to 19 out of 20 professors at most of our universities lean left, and they influence with propaganda all the way down to the grade school. So I think that's the fifth biggest threat that we have right now, is turning around our education and make sure our children, as they come up, understand history, understand our Constitution, understand the importance of having a free and democratic society. So those are the 5 things that I'm going to stress, Mike.
Absolutely. Let's actually get into just a little bit of detail with those things that you've outlined. Now, talking about illegal immigration and the threat that it poses, did you guys have any intel on any Mexican military or cartel or Chinese or Islamo-fascist cells coming in across and operating in North America? And has there been a mop-up operation on those? Are they still a threat, or has that been contained?
Contained to a great deal, since we're building a very strong wall and a very strong passage system through our legal entry sites. But you have to keep in mind, not only is it the borders, our borders are our airports too, Mike, also our ports of entry from the sea. So you have those that have been very much concerned of what may be shipped into this country and what has been shipped, especially opioids, heroin that is funded by the cartels. And so we're cleaning that up as best we can. Of course, they need new laws in Congress to authorize certain things, and the Democrats won't cooperate with the president on that. So,
well, you mentioned fentanyl, and it seems like the Mexicans have kind of been working on that with the Trump administration. They just had that huge bust in southern Mexico of, basically enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in the continental United States. The Mexican Navy intercepted it. So is there some collusion between the U.S. government and the Mexican government, also on the illegals? We have not seen another one of these quote-unquote caravans coming up through Mexico. It's a dead issue. Mainstream media is not talking about kids in cages anymore. So is there some reciprocation with the Mexican government and the Trump administration to put a lid on this?
Well, there is, and that was one of the great moves by President Trump. Strategically, it was brilliant. that we had recommended to him earlier to meet with the presidents of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, excuse me, and work something out on an agreement with the idea that if they don't cooperate with us, we would cut off their foreign aid immediately by 5 o'clock tomorrow. So President Trump negotiated with the Mexicans to stand up, support us. They've now allocated over 24,000 troops on the U.S.-Mexican border, as well as the southern border of Mexico. And they're also filtering out those coming in from Cuba. A lot of people didn't realize a lot of the people coming into the United States also are coming from Cuba into Mexico, then crossing the border into the United States and into Canada. So it's worked very well. We got cooperation going now with Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua to some degree, El Salvador, and of course Mexico. And that's why you see everything tightening up now and getting back to a more, I would say, situation where we don't have all of those people that are coming up from the south crossing our borders as we saw last year or the last 18 months.
Well, that's interesting that you said the president got a hold of them and said, we're cutting your foreign aid by 5 o'clock if they don't do this. That was never reported.
Well, he didn't exactly say that. We asked him to say that.
Right.
He may have said it, but what he basically said, economically, we're going to slap tariffs on everything you do, Mexico. And so, we have a big trade going on here, so you got to work with us and help us. And that's what is great about President Trump. He can negotiate if he can't get cooperation from Congress, and that's what he's been doing.
Brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant because, the U.S. holds the cards. Another thing, if Trump does, let's say he serves 2 terms, if the deep state isn't thoroughly smashed by that time, which I expect that it will be, by the way, but no president will ever again be able to say, look, we can't just make these deals. Look, we can't just change this law. Because that's one thing that Trump has shown the nation is that, yes, you can as a sitting president. Look at all the power that they concentrated in the executive branch with the executive orders and all the rest. I think they were setting it up for Hillary Clinton to really drive the last nail into the republic.
Mike, politicians don't understand how to do that.
Elaborate.
They don't understand. They don't understand how you make deals politically and internationally.
Which is why Trump, a businessman, is better.
That's what you have to do.
Right.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
Let's talk.
And we haven't had a politician could make a deal, including the Bushes and the Clintons, the Obamas. They couldn't make a deal if they tried.
Well, they probably didn't want to. They had no interest in it unless it was making a deal for their own personal gain or to put money in Hunter Biden's pocket.
Yeah, well, that's right. And they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have the skills to do it like President Trump has.
Yeah. And we're seeing the results of it now. Let's talk a little bit about the Chinese military. You're a general. You are well aware of American military capabilities. Do you think that if a conventional war came up between the United States and China, say tomorrow the shooting started, would they be tough to deal with, or is the U.S. military in a position where we could crush them fairly quickly?
Well, they've got an extensive naval capability now that they didn't have. They're coming out with their new carriers, their new copies of the F-22 and their fighter aircraft. A lot of that technology they stole from us, but they've improved considerably. But keep in mind, they're a land-based army for the most part. They're not extended around the world as the United States is with our various lily pads that we have. So I don't know, where would the land war be? That's a good question.
Right. Yeah, maybe North Korea?
Where would you have the conventional war?
Right. Well, and there's probably U.S. weaponry that would blow people's minds. Are you aware of anything like that? I'm not asking you to give out any classified information, but have they got technology that people just can't wrap their head around right now?
Well, absolutely, and of course Russia and China are progressing forward as well in the high tech area. one of the big things is in the space area and cyber terrorism or cyber security, cyber warfare, if you want to call it that. It's just like the Israelis now in their phase one. If they would attack Iran, they would use cyber attacks against their computers. They would knock out all the computers for their missiles, for their aircraft, and so on. And so that's probably what would happen in a future war. You would take the high-tech approach and then knock out their computers. And they can do that with EMP technology, electromagnetic pulse technology, which is a low-yield nuclear attack, which basically deadens all your computers.
Yeah.
Doesn't kill people. So there's all that technology out there. A lot of the capabilities, even now that China is experimenting in, is the outer space. So
which Trump counteracted by creating the Space Force.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
So anyhow,
yeah, no,
I don't see any big land wars anymore. I don't see any big land wars anymore.
You think that's a thing of the past?
Like we saw in World War II. Yes.
No more bayonet fighting in the trenches?
Very little.
Okay, fair. That's an interesting statement.
unless it's a situation like you see with terrorists and Al Qaeda and so on, ISIS, where you get in there hand to hand and knives and pistols and so on. But we use that with our lily pad approach. If we find a target, just like down in Syria, we can attack any target in the world 24 hours a day, anywhere.
Within like 5 minutes, probably, hey?
Yeah, some of it down to 5 minutes, sure.
Yeah.
Even our submarine launches, a lot of people don't realize, but an aircraft carrier group in the United States has 10 to 12 warships. And that aircraft carrier group, just one, and we have 10 to 12 active now, have 80% more firepower than most countries of the world.
Wow.
Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and there's more soon to come. Have a good night.